Rosemary said when we were on the deck of the QE2 going to Europe, she said, how did we get from 77th Street to here? So I always thought I had a pretty interesting life, but I wouldn't want to do it over again. It was too painful. But then look where I am now with my lovely kids and grandchildren and my friends. And so I really lucked out. When I was home with Rosemary and Alice and Libby, I was not the belle of the ball because they were. On a Friday night, Alice would have 6 phone calls asking for a date. I'd be lucky if I had one. Alice had to go to fresh air camp because she couldn't gain any weight, and she did thrive in the fresh air camp. She was gone for about 3 months, and when she came home, I didn't even recognize her. She had done so well. But she's the one that taught me about the facts of life, and I thought, what? But that's how I learned. Religion was a very different, Jim had a different slant on it than I did. He'd always gone to Catholic schools, where I had gone to public schools. And he was sort of indoctrinated with this sort of an institutional mentality, or institutional loyalty, which I didn't have, and neither did my father. He used to drive us into St. Gregory's Church in the next village, in Lyndhurst, from Lyndhurst, and sit in the car and read the Sunday paper until we came out, and then he'd drive us home. And when I knew that I had to leave home, I wrote a letter to Mary Irene and said, I'm thinking of going to live in Chicago. I think I've got a job offer there, and I did have one. And Mary Irene had just said, do you have a place for somebody to stay for a couple of months while she looks for a job? It was a really beautiful building. It had been a mansion with a cherry fireplace, carved cherry, I think. So I was traveling back and forth to Cleveland many weekends because I was still going out with Bob Huppengarter, who was my Cleveland boyfriend. I was in bad shape. Alice said, do you have to go? And I said, if I don't go, I'll die. So they were glad to have Margaret O'Dwyer and me, because we had actual money and jobs and salaries. So every week we bought the groceries. And we went to that. She asked me if I wanted to go to this wedding reception. I said, sure. And that's where I met your dad. Could have been Margaret. Yes, it was, because the bride was a friend of hers. Yeah, Joe, Mo and Joe lived at the corner of, or near the corner of Ashland and Montrose. And there were a couple of gray stone houses there. And a couple of the neighbors opened their fences so that there could be a big wedding reception on 3 lots. And he called me up, and I said later to him, when we were on our first or second date, how did you happen to find my phone number? He said, I'm very perspicacious. And the day I moved out was my wedding day. Well, I was not very good at parenting, since I didn't have any great role model. But John was just the cutest, prettiest, smartest little kid. And my mother-in-law was daffy over him. When Jim and I got engaged, she had a tea for me where I poured, and all of her friends came to meet me. And it was very fancy with a silver teapot and china and little cakes, and this is how you did it in River Forest. And it was fancy. I made a special dress for it. I remember to this day. It was blue shantung, pale blue, with a bias cuff across here. It was just a darling dress. But I made all my clothes then. I happened to have a new sewing machine because your dad worked for Sears. My first purchase of a sewing machine. And I was very excited about it. And it came and it had a scratch on the top. And I called up Sears and they were going to do something and they never did. And finally, Jim wrote a letter. He knew who to write to because he worked for Sears in the management training program, which was hard to get into. And your dad really wasn't a management training. That was not his thing. He wanted to write poetry and read literature. Anyway, he wrote a letter, and by gum, the next day I got a new sewing machine. So I was the breadwinner, and I got up and made breakfast and then went off to work and came home and made supper and so forth. And I made supper one night, and we ate, and we didn't do the dishes. And we went to bed and got up in the morning, and the dishes were still there. And I said, and Jim had been home all day, studying, I guess. And I said, well, how come you didn't, while you were here, clear the table? And said, but honey, that's your job. And I said, I was so imbued with this idea of service that I said, oh, that's right. I don't know where I was coming from. I was so besotted with Jim that it didn't occur to me not to say it. In later years, I would have said, so's your old man, you do it. John was a colicky baby, and he cried a lot. I was afraid I'd never have any more children because I didn't think I'd have that one. But in those years, right after the Second World War, the housing shortage was major, and I had to go down the hall to take a bath, go to the bathroom. John was what they called a single footling. 1 foot came out.
Oh, wow.
And that's not good.
No, it isn't.
So Fitzgibbons pushed the baby back in, turned him around,
And made him head first?
and butt first, and probably saved his life. And that's called the Morisot smelly bite maneuver, which Jim thought was very funny. It's an exciting experience, except that Brian wouldn't come. And I think part of the reason was that I was walking up and down the hall in the hospital, smoking. By God, I was going to breastfeed, and I did. When Edwina got interested in breastfeeding, she organized a national movement for Leche League. And then Ann came along, and Ann was, what do they call it, school phobic? She had to be carried into school because she was screaming bloody, bloody murder. And then Brian he was just a darling kid with his big brown eyes, good-natured, and he used to want to, used to want to stay in the playpen, because if you stayed in the playpen, the traffic running past you would knock you down. It was safer in the playpen. We had a family night. Every Friday night we had Cracker Jack and Tootsie Pops. And we played a table game, like Chutes and Ladders. Family night was fun. The problem was that every time Michael lost, he cried. And his brothers didn't like that, because that meant that we stopped the game and soothed Michael. Well, Patrick used to put his pants on sideways, because I have pictures of him, where the center seam of the pants was over at the hip someplace when I went from Cleveland to Chicago. And I interviewed, and I turned down the Bettelheim job. Working in a hospital sort of intrigued me. So I took the job with Virginia Kenny at $150 a week. And I was assigned to the tumor clinic and the diabetic clinic. And I loved medical social work. I got the job at Travelers Aid after I left after I left Arnie Hospital. We used to meet the refugee trains down at LaSalle Street Station. Well, I was scared stiff talking to Aaron's class because I couldn't bring any notes because I couldn't read them. And Aaron's friends think that, and Adam's friends, because he's heard the story, think that I am so cool. Here's this really old lady, and she's talking about workers' rights, but they think I'm cool. And when a 17-year-old thinks an 87-year-old is cool, that's a compliment. And I wasn't a great imaginative cook. I bought 64 chickens once because they were 29 cents a pound. And of course, I had a big freezer, and I was trying to make do on your father's small income. And I cut them up and cooked them in the Nesco roaster. Ann said one day, this was many years later, she said, could we have something besides chicken? But I certainly thought I had a story to tell because of the poverty that we had and the abuse. But I never wanted to talk about the abuse because I was always ashamed of it. I don't know why, and that's the problem with people who are abused. Feel as if they're ashamed because there must be something that they're doing that's making this abuse. So Eileen Hogan and Rosemary Smith never knew about this, though they were my best friends.
And say what your mother used to say when it got cold.
She said, don't forget the poor people tonight. And it has never left me. Every time it's really cold, I think of the poor people. And we were poor people.